Elena Bertoli's hands were shaking so hard she nearly lost her grip on his collar. The water was black and freezing, closing over the windshield in a rush, and somewhere beneath the surface, a man was trapped behind a wheel that wouldn't turn, a seatbelt that wouldn't release, lungs that were seconds from filling with the canal. She didn't think. She kicked off her shoes on the bridge, ignored the screaming behind her, and jumped. 20 seconds. That was what the paramedics would later say was the difference between a body and a rescue. 20 seconds underwater, and Elena spent every one of them, with her fingers tearing at a jammed buckle, her lungs burning, her vision going gray at the edges, while a stranger's life depended on hands that had never done anything more dangerous than carry hot pizza boxes up 4 flights of stairs. She got the buckle free. She doesn't remember how. She remembers dragging 200 pounds of unconscious man to the surface, with arms that felt like they belonged to someone else. Remembers the scream she let out when her head finally broke into air. Remembers strangers on the bridge filming instead of helping. She remembers his eyes opening on the pavement, black and wild and afraid, before they focused on her face like she was the only solid thing in the world. "Chisei," he rasped. "Who are you?" She didn't answer. She was too busy vomiting canal water onto the cobblestones. That was 4 days before the black cars started parking outside her apartment. If you're the kind of person who can't look away from a story that starts in the deep end, hit subscribe now, because this one only gets darker from here. Elena Bertoli was 28 years old and delivered food for a living, weaving her scooter through the narrow streets of a city that didn't know her name and didn't care to. She was beautiful in the way that made people uncomfortable when they tried to compliment her, full-figured, soft everywhere a person could be soft, with dark curls that refused to behave and a laugh that came from somewhere low in her chest and filled up whatever room she was standing in. She had been called too big for this dress, too loud for that job interview, too much for men who wanted women who took up less space. She had stopped waiting for the world to make room for her, a long time ago. She made her own room. She hadn't planned on being a hero. She had planned on dropping off a lasagna order to a customer who wasn't answering his phone, and instead she'd watched a black sedan clip a guardrail on the Ponte Vittorio and go through it like paper. Nobody else moved. She moved. She thought that was the end of it. A strange, terrifying story to tell her Nana over Sunday dinner. She did not think the man she'd pulled out of the canal was Dante Moretti, the name whispered in back rooms and police files across 3 provinces, the man whose family had run the city's underworld for 2 generations, the man currently lying in a private clinic with 2 cracked ribs and a target on his back that had nothing to do with the accident and everything to do with the men who'd cut his brake line. She found out exactly who he was 3 days later, when she opened her apartment door to 2 men in black suits who did not smile. "Signorina Bertoli," the taller one said. "Mr. Moretti would like a word." "I don't know a Mr. Moretti. You pulled him out of the river." Her stomach dropped. "That man is... that was the... Get your coat," he said, not unkindly. "It's not safe for you to stay here tonight." She should have slammed the door. She should have screamed for a neighbor, called the police, done any of the sensible things a woman is supposed to do when strange men in expensive suits show up asking her to leave with them. Instead, she found herself staring past them at the car idling at the curb, black and gleaming and utterly wrong for her street. And she thought about the way that stranger's eyes had locked onto hers on the pavement, like she was the only fixed point in a spinning world. "Why," she said, "does it matter that it's not safe for me?" The taller man's jaw tightened. "Because the people who tried to kill him have your face on camera pulling him out, and Mr. Moretti does not leave debts unpaid." She went cold all over. The drive was silent. The city blurred past the windows, familiar streets made strange by the tint of bulletproof glass, and Elena sat with her hands knotted in her lap trying to remember every Mafia film she'd ever half-watched. trying to figure out if she was about to be thanked or buried. The house they brought her to wasn't a house. It was a fortress dressed up as one. High walls and dark windows, and men stationed at intervals like pieces on a board she didn't know she was playing. And in the center of it, in a study lined with old books and older money, stood the man from the canal, upright now, dry, dressed in black, ink crawling up his throat from beneath his collar like something alive. Dante Moretti was not what she expected. He was not what anyone expected, probably, until they were standing in front of him and feeling the full weight of a man who had learned young that softness got you killed. Tattoos climbed both forearms, disappeared beneath rolled sleeves, reappeared at his collarbone and up the column of his neck. A man who had turned his own body into a record of every war he'd survived. His eyes found hers across the room, and something in his controlled, dangerous stillness cracked, just slightly, at the sight of her. "You saved my life," he said. His voice was rough, like it still remembered the water. "And I don't know your name." "Elena," she said. "Elena Bertoli. Elena." He said it like he was memorizing it. Then his expression shifted, the softness gone as fast as it had come, replaced by something harder, colder, more afraid than she'd ever seen a man like him look. "The men who tried to kill me know your name too. As of tonight, so does everyone I've ever made an enemy of." She felt the floor tilt beneath her. "What does that mean?" "It means," Dante said quietly, "that I am about to ruin your life to save it. And I need you to understand. Once I bring you inside these walls, there's no version of this where you simply go home." She should have run. Later, she would replay that moment 100 times and wonder why her feet didn't carry her straight back out the door, past the men with guns under their jackets, into a street where her life still made sense. But she stayed. Because something about the way Dante Moretti said, "ruin your life to save it," sounded less like a threat and more like a confession. "Explain it to me," she said. "All of it. I didn't ask to be part of whatever this is. I pulled a stranger out of a river. That's the whole story I signed up for." Dante studied her for a long moment, the kind of look that made her feel like he was recalculating something. Most people, she suspected, wilted under that stare. She didn't. "My brakes didn't fail," he said. "They were cut by someone inside my own organization, working for someone I trusted for 15 years. His jaw tightened. "Salvatore Greco, my underboss, my father's oldest friend. Why would he want you dead?" "Because in 11 days, I'm supposed to marry his daughter." A humorless smile. "Carmela. It was arranged before either of us could walk. 2 families, 1 empire, sealed with a wedding. Except it seems her father decided he'd rather have the whole empire than half of it through marriage." Elena's mind was spinning. "So he tried to kill you before the wedding. He tried to kill me and make it look like an accident. So Carmela inherits my share as a grieving widow instead of a bride. Neat, efficient. It would have worked." His eyes found hers again, and this time there was nothing calculated in it at all. If a delivery girl with more courage than sense hadn't jumped into a canal for a man she'd never met. If this story has your heart racing already, drop a comment below telling me what you'd have done in Elena's place, because it's about to get a lot harder to answer that question. "So now what?" Elena asked. "You hide me in a fortress until the wedding happens anyway?" "There is no wedding." Something dangerous moved behind his eyes. "Not anymore. Salvatore made his move too early. I still have enough loyal men to end this before it ends me. But I need time, and I need him to believe I don't know what he did. And where do I fit into that?" "You don't have to fit into it at all," he said. And for a moment the Mafia boss disappeared entirely, replaced by a man who looked, briefly, terrified for someone other than himself. "I can have you placed somewhere safe. New city, New name, protection for as long as you need it. You never have to see me again. Elena felt something twist in her chest that she didn't have a name for yet. Is that what you want? Dante didn't answer right away. Outside the study window, rain had started again, tracing thin lines down the old glass, and for a moment, the only sound was the fire cracking in the hearth and the distant murmur of men who lived and died by his word. No, he said finally, quietly, like the admission cost him something. But what I want has gotten people killed before. She didn't know what to say to that, so instead she said, I'm not going anywhere. Not yet. Not until I understand what I actually pulled out of that river. That earned her the ghost of a smile, the first real one she'd seen on him. You're either the bravest woman I've ever met, or the most foolish. My Nana always said I could be both at once. 3 days folded into each other inside the walls of the Moretti estate. Elena learned the rhythms of a world she'd only ever seen in headlines. Men who came and went at strange hours. Conversations that stopped when she entered a room. A housekeeper named Rosa who fed her like she was trying to fatten her up for a feast, and told her, in a low voice over espresso, that she hadn't seen Dante smile like this in years. He watches you when you're not looking, Rosa said. Careful, Tesoro. That man doesn't let people close. Not since his mother. What happened to his mother? Rosa's face closed like a door. Ask him yourself. Not my story to tell. Elena did ask him, 2 nights later, when she found him alone on the terrace with a glass of wine he wasn't drinking, staring out at the dark gardens like they held an answer he'd been looking for his whole life. My mother married into this family thinking love could soften it, Dante said, before she'd even finished the question. She spent 20 years trying to civilize my father, trying to convince him there was a version of this life that didn't end in blood. He turned the glass slowly in his hand. There isn't. She found that out the hard way. So did I. What happened to her? Grieving isn't a story I tell on the 2nd week of knowing someone. But he looked at her, and something in his voice softened despite itself. Ask me again in a month. You're assuming I'll still be here in a month. I'm hoping, he said, and the honesty of it seemed to surprise him as much as it surprised her. She should have felt afraid of him. Instead, standing there in the cool night air with a dangerous, tattooed, grieving man who looked at her like she was something rare, Elena felt something far more frightening than fear. She felt like she was starting to fall. And 3 floors below them, in a locked office with the curtains drawn, Salvatore Greco was already making the phone call that would turn Elena Bertoli from a witness into a target. The call came through a burner phone that Salvatore kept in a drawer no one else had a key to. He waited until the 2nd ring before answering, his voice low and clipped. He's alive, Salvatore said. You told me the brakes would be enough. They would have been. The voice on the other end answered, cold as the canal water. If the girl hadn't jumped in after him, then we remove the girl. That's what I'm calling about. There's a complication. He's not hiding her. He's protecting her. Openly. She's living in the house. Salvatore's grip tightened on the phone. In 15 years of loyal service, of smiling across dinner tables at the man he was now planning to bury, he had never once seen Dante Moretti let anyone close. Not since the funeral. Not since the boy had learned, at 17, exactly what love cost people in this family. Then we make it look like she was never protected at all, Salvatore said quietly. Find out where she goes when she leaves the estate. Everyone leaves, eventually. 2 days later, Dante found Elena in the estate's kitchen at midnight, elbow deep in flour, a smear of it across her cheek, humming something under her breath that he didn't recognize. She hadn't heard him come in. For a long moment he just watched her, the ease in her shoulders, the way she moved through a room like she belonged in it. something none of the wealthy, careful women he'd been raised around had ever managed. "You cook when you're anxious," he said. She startled, then laughed, low and warm, wiping her hands on her apron. "My nonna's recipe, tortellini and brodo. She always said if your hands are busy, your fear can't catch up to you. Is it catching up to you?" Elena's smile faded a little. She set down the rolling pin. "I keep thinking about what happens after Salvatore, after the wedding that isn't happening. You go back to running an empire, and I go back to delivering food nobody remembers the name of the person who brought it." She looked up at him. "What exactly is this, Dante? What are we doing?" He crossed the kitchen slowly, stopping close enough that she had to tilt her head back to hold his gaze. Up close, the ink at his throat looked less like armor and more like a map of every scar he'd never let anyone see. "I don't know how to do this the safe way," he admitted. "Everything in my life has a plan, a contingency, an exit. Except this. Except you." His hand came up, hesitant, and brushed the flour from her cheek with a gentleness that seemed impossible for hands that had done the things his had done. "I look at you, and for the first time in 15 years, I'm not thinking about who wants me dead." "That's either the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me," Elena whispered, "or the saddest. Maybe both at once," he said, echoing her words from days before. And when he kissed her, it wasn't careful or practiced. It was a man putting down a weight he'd carried so long he'd forgotten what his shoulders felt like without it. If you're rooting for these two by now, let us know in the comments, because Salvatore isn't finished, and what he does next is going to break your heart before it fixes anything. The peace didn't last the night. Elena woke before dawn to raised voices in the courtyard, and by the time she'd thrown on a robe and made it to the window, she saw Dante's men dragging a bloodied, half-conscious figure through the gates. Rosa appeared at her door moments later, face pale. "One of Salvatore's men," Rosa said. "Caught trying to plant a tracking device on the delivery gate. The one you used to come and go for work." Elena's stomach turned to ice. "They know I still leave. They know my roots. They know everything, Tesoro. That's what men like Salvatore do. They watch, they wait, they find the crack." Rosa took her hands. "Dante will not let anything happen to you, but you should know what kind of war you've walked into." Downstairs, the interrogation was already underway, and what the frightened, bleeding man confessed made Dante go very, very still. "Salvatore knows," the man gasped. "Knows the girl means something to you. He's not planning to come for you directly anymore. He's planning to take her, make you watch, break you the way you broke his plan." Dante's voice, when it came, was quieter than Elena had ever heard it, and infinitely more dangerous. "Where is he now?" "I don't know. I swear I don't know." Dante turned to his lieutenant, and for the first time Elena saw the full weight of the man beneath the tattoos. The boy who'd lost his mother to this life, now standing in the exact place she'd died, trying to protect him. "Triple the men on Elena," he said. "Nobody enters or leaves this estate without my say. And find Salvatore before he finds her, because I promise you, if he touches one hair on her head, there will not be enough of this city left standing to bury what I do to him." Elena stood frozen in the doorway, hand pressed to her mouth, watching the man she had fallen for in the space of 2 weeks become someone capable of the very violence she'd been afraid of the first night she stepped into his world. And somewhere across the city, in a safe house no one knew existed yet, Salvatore Greco smiled at the photograph in his hand. Elena, laughing, unaware, captured through a long lens 3 days earlier, outside a pharmacy 2 blocks from the estate. "Let him look for me," Salvatore murmured. "I already know exactly where she'll be tomorrow." Elena wasn't supposed to leave the estate. That was the rule now, the one Dante had made absolute after the interrogation. the one every guard at every gate had been told to enforce without exception. But her mother had a doctor's appointment across town, the kind of appointment an 81-year-old woman shouldn't go to alone. And when Elena tried to explain that to Dante over breakfast, his jaw had gone tight in a way that scared her more than Salvatore did. "Send one of my men," he said. "Send Rosa. Send anyone but you. She doesn't trust strangers, Dante. She's scared and confused, and she needs her daughter, not a bodyguard with a gun under his jacket." Elena reached across the table and took his hand, feeling the tension coiled in it like a spring. "I'll take 3 of your men. I'll be back before lunch. Please. This is my mother." He looked at her for a long time, and she watched him lose the argument he knew, somewhere underneath the fear, he shouldn't be having. 3 men, a car with tinted windows. You call me the second you're in, and the second you're out. She should have known it wouldn't be that simple. Nothing in the last 3 weeks had been that simple. The appointment went fine. Her mother's blood pressure was a little high, nothing urgent, and Elena walked her back to her apartment afterward, laughing at some story about a neighbor's cat, feeling for the first time in weeks like an ordinary woman living an ordinary life. She was 3 steps from the car, her mother's door safely shut behind her, when the world went sideways. The first man came from her left, fast, professional, a hand clamping over her mouth before she could scream. Dante's guards reacted immediately. A shot rang out, then another, chaos exploding across a quiet residential street in the middle of the afternoon. But there were more of them than anyone had counted on, 6 against 3, and Elena felt herself being dragged backward toward a van with its side door already open. "Tell your boyfriend," a voice hissed against her ear, "that Salvatore says the wedding is back on. Just a different bride." She fought. She bit down hard on the hand over her mouth and heard a satisfying scream, twisted her considerable weight against her captor's grip in a way he clearly hadn't planned for, and for one wild second thought she might actually break free, until something hard cracked against the back of her skull, and the world went dark. Comment below right now if you think Dante gets to her in time, because what happens in the next 60 seconds decides everything. Dante was in a war room 3 miles away, staring at a map of Salvatore's known properties, when his phone rang with the words he had feared since the night in the canal. "They took her," his lieutenant said, voice raw. "2 of ours are dead." She fought. Dante. She fought hard, but there were too many. The sound Dante made was not human. Rosa, standing nearby, took an involuntary step back from a man she had known since he was a boy and had never, in all those years, seen look like this. "Every man we have," Dante said, voice gone to ice. "Every safe house, every property, every rat hole Salvatore has ever crawled into. I want it found in the next hour. And if we find him?" Dante's eyes were black with a fury that had been building for 15 years. Since a funeral he'd stood through without crying because his father told him men like them didn't cry. Since the moment he'd promised himself he would never again stand helpless while someone he loved paid the price for his world. "Then God help him," Dante said, "because I won't." Elena woke to the smell of damp concrete and the sound of her own heartbeat too loud in her ears. Her hands were bound behind a wooden chair, her head throbbing where she'd been struck, and across the dim room, Salvatore Greco sat watching her with the calm, patient interest of a man who had already won. "You're prettier in person," he said. "I can see why he's lost his mind over you." "He'll find you," Elena said, and was proud of how steady her voice came out. "And when he does, he'll find exactly what I want him to find." Salvatore leaned forward. "You see, Elena, may I call you Elena? I don't actually want you dead. Dead women don't hurt nearly as much as living ones who belong to someone else. I'm going to marry you off to one of my men, somewhere Dante will never find you, and every single day for the rest of his miserable life, he is going to know exactly what I took from him, and exactly why." Elena's blood ran cold, but underneath the fear something else was rising, the same stubborn, reckless courage that had once sent her diving into a freezing canal for a stranger. "You didn't count on one thing," she said. Salvatore raised an eyebrow, almost amused. "And what's that?" "I already survived drowning once," Elena said. "I'm not afraid of you." Outside, 3 streets away, a convoy of black cars was closing in on a location bought with a dead man's confession and Dante Moretti's 15 years of buried, furious patience. And for the first time since the canal, he was no longer thinking about contingencies or exit plans. He was thinking only of getting to her before Salvatore's patience ran out. The door came off its hinges before Salvatore even heard the trucks pull up. Dante walked into that basement like a man who had already decided what kind of death he was willing to accept for himself if it meant Elena walked out alive, and it wasn't one that involved hesitation. His men fanned out behind him, but he didn't wait for them. He crossed the room in 4 strides and put himself between Elena and the gun Salvatore was already raising. "Put it down," Dante said. His voice didn't shake. Nothing about him shook. "This ends with you and me, Salvatore." "It was always going to end with you and me." "You'd let her watch," Salvatore said, gun trembling slightly despite himself. "You'd really let her watch you die, rather than hand her over?" "I'd let the whole world watch," Dante said, "before I let you touch one more hair on her head." Elena, still bound to the chair, watched the standoff with her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack a rib. 15 years of loyalty, curdled into 15 years of betrayal, stood 2 feet apart, and she understood, in that frozen moment, that whatever happened next would define the rest of both their lives. "Your father would be ashamed of what you've let this family become," Salvatore spat, soft, sentimental, bleeding for a delivery girl. "My father built an empire on fear and buried my mother because of it," Dante said quietly. "I'd rather bleed for something real than rule over something hollow." Salvatore's finger tightened on the trigger, and Elena, still bound but never one to simply watch when action was possible, threw her entire weight sideways, chair and all, crashing into Salvatore's legs at exactly the moment the gun fired. The shot went wide, burying itself in the concrete wall instead of Dante's chest, and in the half-second of chaos that followed, Dante closed the distance and ended it with his bare hands. Years of restrained fury, finally given somewhere to go. When it was over, when Salvatore lay disarmed and bleeding and finished on that basement floor, Dante didn't even look at him again. He was already on his knees beside Elena's chair, hands shaking now for the first time all day as he tore through the ropes at her wrists. "I'm okay," she kept saying, "Dante, I'm okay. Look at me. I'm okay." Because he wasn't hearing her. He was too busy checking every inch of her for injuries with the desperate, careful hands of a man who had genuinely believed, an hour ago, that he might never get the chance to touch her again. "I told you," he said, voice breaking in a way she'd never heard from him. "I told you I don't know how to do this the safe way." "Good thing," Elena said, pulling him against her. "I never wanted safe. I wanted you. If this story had you holding your breath, this is your sign to hit like. Share it with someone who needs a good cry. And subscribe for more stories just like this one, because the ending isn't quite finished yet." 6 weeks later, the estate looked different, lighter, somehow, though nothing about the walls or the gates had changed. Rosa said it was because laughter finally lived there again. Real laughter, the kind that had gone quiet the day Dante's mother died, and hadn't fully returned until a plus-sized delivery girl with flour on her cheek and courage in her chest had walked through the front door. Dante found Elena on the same terrace where he'd once told her he was hoping she'd still be there in a month. She was curled into the chair with a cup of espresso, curls escaping their pins, looking so entirely at home that it was hard to remember a time she hadn't been. "I have something to ask you," he said, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, his hands were unsteady for a reason that had nothing to do with violence. Elena set down her cup slowly. "Dante Moretti, are you nervous?" "Terrified," he admitted, and dropped to one knee in front of her, pulling a small velvet box from his jacket. "I spent my whole life believing love was a weakness in this family, that it got people killed. You taught me it's the only thing worth surviving for." He opened the box with hands that had ended a man's life 6 weeks ago, and now trembled over a ring. "Marry me. Not because it's arranged, not because it's strategic, because I cannot imagine another sunrise on this terrace without you on it." Elena's eyes filled, her breath catching the way it had the very first night, when a stranger's eyes had opened on wet pavement and found hers like she was the only solid thing in a spinning world.
"You already dragged me out of a river without asking," she said, laughing through tears. "The least you can do is ask properly for this. Is that a yes?" "Dante." She cupped his tattooed jaw in both hands, the same hands that had once torn a jammed seatbelt free underwater, the same hands that had never once let go of him since.
It was a yes the moment I jumped. Below the terrace, the gardens Dante's mother once planted were blooming again, for the first time in 15 years. And somewhere in the city, the empire her son had inherited was finally, quietly, learning how to be something softer than fear. If you made it to the very end of this story, thank you for staying with Elena and Dante through every twist. Drop a comment telling us which moment hit you hardest. Share this with someone who loves a slow burn mafia romance. And subscribe so you never miss the next one.